to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today we continue seeing Solomon build the temple in 2 Chronicles chapter 4. He made an altar of bronze, 20 cubits long and 20 cubits wide and 10 cubits high. Then he made the sea of cast metal. It was round, 10 cubits from brim to brim and 5 cubits high, and a line of 30 cubits measured its circumference. Under it were figures of gourds for 10 cubits, encompassing the sea all around. The gourds were in 2 rows, cast with it when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them, and all their rear parts were inward. Its thickness was a handbreadth, and its brim was made like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 3,000 baths. He also made 10 basins in which to wash, and set 5 on the south side and 5 on the north side. In these they were to rinse off what was used for burnt offering, and the sea was for the priest to wash in. And he made 10 golden lampstands as prescribed, and set them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. He also made 10 tables, and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. And he made 100 basins of gold. He made the court of the priests and the great court, and doors for the court, and overlaid their doors with bronze. And he set the sea at the southeast corner of the house. Hiram also made the pots, the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram finished the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of God: the 2 pillars, the bowls, and the 2 capitals on the top of the pillars, and the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, and the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice work to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the pillars. He made the stands also, and the basins on the stands, and the 1 sea and the 12 oxen underneath it, the pots, the shovels, the forks, and all the equipment for these Huram-Abi made of burnished bronze for King Solomon for the house of Yahweh. In the plain of Jordan the king cast them, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zeradah. Solomon made all these things in great quantities, for the weight of the bronze was not sought. So Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of God: the golden altar, the tables for the bread of the presence, the lampstands and their lamps of pure gold to burn before the inner sanctuary as prescribed, the flowers, the lamps, and the tongs of purest gold, the snuffers, basins, dishes for incense, and fire pans of pure gold, and the sockets of the temple for the inner doors of the most holy place, and for the doors of the nave of the temple were of gold. This is the word of the Lord. All right, there's a lot in this chapter that we're not going to be able to speak much to, simply because it's the decorative work, and we don't have it anymore. This temple was destroyed when the Babylonians crushed Jerusalem in 587 BC, and there isn't really a lot of surviving artwork that can even display it for us. So we have the descriptions in Scripture, but that's about all we have, and they're not detailed descriptions. This is not a blueprint that we could possibly remake ourselves. I mean, it gives us a lot of the info, but a lot of this is going to have to be left to just our own minds to envision what this looked like. So the tabernacle, originally, the one that they had in the wilderness wanderings that they built at that time under Moses, that they took around for generations after, for 1446 BC until 960 BC, that's almost 500 years that they were carrying this tabernacle around, moving it from place to place. Now, in fairness, after they got to the Promised Land, it stayed in the same place for a while. 300 of those years was in one city. But because they had to move that thing so much, it wasn't as big as the temple's going to be. The temple is going to basically be the tabernacle, but permanent and bigger. Everything's bigger. And so I'll talk about that a few times when we see those things. I guess the one that I didn't do yesterday was the size of the temple itself, being 90 feet in its length. So a cubit is 1.5 feet, 18 inches. So a 60 cubit length, 90 feet. That's the original was 30 cubits, so 45 feet. So it's twice as big, just the building itself in length, for the actual building of the temple versus the tabernacle tent. The original most holy place was a 10 cubit cube, so 15 feet wide by deep by tall. And this new one is going to be 30 feet instead of 15, and the height isn't mentioned, so it's taller as well. Now we move into the furnishings for it. An altar of bronze is described right away. Maybe ask your children. So where there's an altar of bronze here in verse 1, and there's an altar again in verse 19 that's made of gold, ask your children what these are for, if they know. And if not, you can teach them this. So the altar of bronze is going to be in the courtyard outside of the temple, and it's the place for burnt offerings to be made, sacrifices to God for forgiveness described in Leviticus 1 through 7. The golden altar is inside the temple, and it's for the offering of incense, which the book of Revelation will make a direct correlation to the prayers of the saints with the offering of incense. As you think of burning incense, the smoke rising upward, that's the picture, that our prayers rise before the Lord. So that's what those two altars are for in the text. So the first altar at the tabernacle, the bronze altar for burnt offerings, was 5 cubits by 5 cubits, and it was 3 cubits high. So 7.5 feet in either direction, and 4.5 feet tall. So that's a difficult altar to work with already. Imagine trying to, the priest trying to hoist a bull up onto that 4.5 foot ledge. Take a look at the length of this one. It's going to be 30 feet by 30 feet, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and height 10 cubits. That's 15 feet. You can't hoist something up that high, and this is going to require stairs or ramps that the priest can make use of as they make the offerings before the Lord at this point now. Very different. Again, huge by comparison to the tabernacle. The sea of cast metal. So the original tabernacle had a basin, a bowl outside that could be used to wash things, for the priest to wash things in first. And we see the sea has the same purpose down in verse 6. The sea was for the priest to wash in as they prepared to do the sacrifices or after. It was for washing. The sea, however, is 10 cubits from brim to brim. So diameter of this bowl is 15 feet. And its height is 5 cubits. That's 7.5 feet tall. That's a big bowl. And then we're told, where is that? Verse 5. Its thickness is a handbreadth. So just hold up your hand, the width of your hand across from, you don't have to count the thumb there, but across your palm, 4 inches or so. It's a thick pouring of metal here. And then it held 3,000 baths of water. A bath is 5.8 gallons or 22 liters. So this is 17,400 gallons of water. Hold up your milk jug if you've got it on your table when you do family devotion. This is, by the way, a comparison point. Your bathtub, if it's a standard sized bathtub, probably holds about 80 gallons of water. 17,400 gallons of water. This is huge. And even though, it's only 7.5 feet high, well, it's more than that. We're not told the shape of the bulls, the height of the bulls here, but it's placed on top of bulls. So these bulls are going to be made, oxen are going to be made, 12 of them. So picture 3 metal oxen facing together in each direction. So you've got 3 facing north, 3 facing south, 3 west, 3 east. Their rear ends, their tails would be in the middle. But on their backs is where this sea sits. It sits atop them. So just like they're going to need ramps to get up to do the sacrifices on the altar, they're going to need ramps to get up to the sea. And then there's 10 bowls, basins, in which they can use to wash the different things that are going to be needed for the sacrifices. Set 5 on the south, 5 on the north. The north-south, we saw that even yesterday, is because the tabernacle, the temple now, faces east. The tabernacle is always to be set facing east. The temple will be constructed facing east. Connections there, the place of creation. From the perspective of Jerusalem, the original starting point of man would have been to the east. Today, we would think of it as like the land of Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers come together. It's also the idea of the place of the rising sun. And that does have a connection to Jesus in the church today. Many churches, especially with Roman Catholic architecture, are built facing east like the temple because you're facing Christ, is the picture. You think of the rising of the sun. English, that works out pretty nicely, by the way. The word sun, S-U-N, and the word S-O-N, sun. Other languages, not so much. But Jesus is the light of the world. And so we think of the sun, S-U-N, rising in the east. You can think of the sun, S-O-N, rising in the east. I read a Roman Catholic description in prep for the show today of this practice, and it was referring to Matthew 24, verse 27, the idea that as lightning stretches from the east to the west, so would be the coming of the Son of Man. So there's a Bible verse if you want to put something to it. But that's a practice, a tradition in the history of the church as well, that you can still see in many places. Not every church body looks to that or has that kind of a tradition. Okay, so that's the sea, the altar, and the basins. Then we move to things that will be inside of this new temple. The original tabernacle had one lampstand. This temple is going to have 10 of them. So again, bigger. The lampstand's purpose is to give light inside so the priest can see what he's doing and minister before the Lord. So this is a bigger space. It needs more light to fill it. 5 on the south, 5 on the north, so on each wall. As you come in, you'd walk in from the east, you'd be walking west, you'd see 5 on each side of you. They're made of then they made 100 basins of gold. Those are used for various purposes within the temple, for holding different things that need to be held. And then we have reference to the court of the priests, which would be a part of the temple complex, also built, and this is going to be overlaid with bronze. This was true with the tabernacle originally as well. If you look at the description of all the pieces of the tabernacle, the further removed you are from the Ark of the Covenant, the less valuable the material. The closer you get to the Ark, the more valuable the material is going to be. And that's true in the temple as well. So now we're doing stuff outside, it's bronze. But when we were inside, gold. The Lord is holy. And so closer we get to the Lord, the holier the stuff was. Basically is the picture there. The sea is going to be set on the southeast corner outside of the house, so that's by Pillar Jakin from yesterday's closing words. So if you were looking at the temple from its front, the sea would be on the left, on top of all these oxen. Hiram and Solomon in the next 2 paragraphs are both credited with this work. Hiram made it all, Solomon made it all. Solomon is the one who has ordered this to be done. Hiram has even ordered this to be done. And really, Huram-Abi is the one doing a lot of this together with the craftsmen that Solomon had set aside by his father David for him. So they're being credited with the work because they're overseeing the work. It's called Solomon's Temple, although we have no idea how much, if any, actual physical work Solomon himself put into it. So the paragraph for Hiram is going to describe just a whole bunch of decorative stuff primarily. I mean, yes, the pillars and the bowls that we've been talking about in the last couple chapters, but the lattice work, the capitals on top of the pillars, the pomegranates and so forth, we just don't know a lot about them. Pots, shovels, forks, basins to be used in the house for the various services of the Lord, definitely of use. They are made, verse 17, in the plain of the Jordan, that the king has cast them, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zereda. Succoth is actually east of the Jordan River, so the plain of the Jordan could refer to really the flat land on either side of the river, as you think about it. So the Jordan River area is very mountainous, but there would be some flat areas, some plains in that land too. So Succoth is on the east of the Jordan, and we just don't know where Zereda is, so it's hard to say exactly where these pieces were all made, but local, I mean nearby. They didn't even bother to measure all the bronze they used for all of this. So Solomon makes all of these vessels, just like we said of Hiram. And then a whole bunch more is mentioned that we're not having described for us. These pieces are described much more fully in the book of Exodus for the tabernacle account. So you've got the golden altar in which they'll offer incense, table for the bread of the presence, which is going to hold both bread and wine inside of the tabernacle, now inside the temple, foreshadowing the Lord's Supper for us. The lampstands and their lamps of pure gold. The original lampstand described again in Exodus was made out of, even though it had like the candelabra look, it had the branches on each side of it with decorative flowers and whatnot. It was all one piece. It was carved out of a single piece of gold. Probably the same here. Flowers, lamps, tongs, snuffers, basins, dishes, all these different things that are being just very quickly listed off, but these have all been done. So the temple description covers just a couple of chapters, but again, took 7 years for Solomon and his crew here to actually complete and finish. Maybe a conversation around your own church, the decorations that you see, what the symbols teach. That's what they're there for. Church architecture specifically has historically, throughout most of the history of the church, been for the sake of teaching. Your church, if it's an A-frame, like it's got the kind of the peaked roof in the middle inside, it's meant to look like the hull of a ship. The church is the boat. Like God protected Noah and his family safely on the ark to bring them through the waters, the storm, so God protects his people. He has delivered us out of this world. He protects us from the storm of the darkness of this world and brings us safely into his paradise someday. That's intentional. The cross hangs above the altar because Christ's sacrifice is better than the sacrifice of the Old Testament. It's a forgiveness of sins once and for all, not, 1,000 bulls or then some. All the different pieces, stained glass teaches, the lamps, or the candles as we call them, that give light is a reference to Christ himself giving light. He is the light of the world. There's an eternal candle in a lot of our churches, that Christ is always present, always with us. Just so much meaning that goes into it. So have that conversation together. What do you see? Bring it to church. Like the next time you're in church, what do you see? And talk about why we have those things. And if you don't know, go over together and ask your pastor. And say, Pastor, why does the baptismal font, why isn't it just a square? Or why isn't it just like round? Why does it have 8 sides? Or why is it an octagon? There's a reason, and he'd be happy to tell you. And if he doesn't know, he can look it up. He can find it out and get back to you. So that's a useful family conversation and way to go about handling a text like this, where, again, we don't have a picture even of what this fully looks like. So we rely on the tabernacle's layout because, again, this is just the permanent one, better. It doesn't have to be carried anymore, so it can be bigger. I should probably say bigger, not better. It's the Lord's house, and he has designed it. He has given the blueprint to his people. Solomon's not just doing whatever he wants. That's important for us too. Worship's holy. The house of God is holy. As I mentioned with the idea of the ark, we're stepping out of the brokenness of the world and into the boat of our salvation, the place where we receive Christ's word, his promises, his forgiveness for us.